When people hear the words Opus Dei, they often conjure images of shadowy Catholic figures moving quietly behind the curtains of power, whispering in corridors of governments, universities, and even the Vatican itself. Popular culture, especially after the worldwide success of Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, has painted Opus Dei as a secret society obsessed with discipline, secrecy, and ruthless influence. Yet behind this dramatic portrayal lies a real Catholic institution, founded in the early 20th century, that is both highly admired and deeply criticized. Its supporters view it as a spiritual path for holiness in everyday life, while detractors call it authoritarian, manipulative, and dangerously close to political power. To understand why this group inspires both loyalty and suspicion, one must journey into its origins, inner life, controversies, and its place in modern Catholicism. Opus Dei, Latin for Work of God, was founded in Madrid on October 2, 1928, by a young Spanish priest named José María Escriva de Balaguer. Escriva claimed that he received a divine vision while in prayer, revealing to him a new way for ordinary Christians to live out holiness. In a time when the Catholic ideal of sanctity was often associated with monks, nuns, and priests living in cloisters, Escriva's idea was radical. Every person, regardless of their occupation or state in life, could achieve sanctity by offering their daily work to God. A banker balancing financial accounts, a doctor treating patients, a mother raising her children, or a student struggling with exams, all could become holy through the sanctification of ordinary life. This emphasis on the universal call to holiness became the cornerstone of Opus Dei spirituality. Escriva's vision aligned with a broader theological shift in the Catholic Church that later culminated in the Second Vatican Council, 1962 to 1965. But in the 1930s, his idea was groundbreaking. He started with a small group of students and young professionals, forming a network of laypeople who would dedicate themselves to prayer, professional excellence, and Christian virtue in secular life. By 1950, the Vatican formally approved Opus Dei as a secular institute, granting it recognition and legitimacy. Later, in 1982, Pope John Paul II elevated it to the status of a personal prelature, a unique structure in the Catholic Church that allowed Opus Dei to operate across diocesan lines under the direct authority of its prelate, rather than being confined to geographic boundaries like most parishes or dioceses. This gave the organization unusual autonomy and global reach, cementing its distinct place in the Church. At its heart, Opus Dei's spirituality emphasizes holiness through work. This means that members are encouraged to do their jobs with excellence, integrity, and a sense of offering their labor to God. Rather than withdrawing from the world, they immerse themselves in it, bringing faith into offices, classrooms, hospitals, and marketplaces. The practices of Opus Dei, however, are more rigorous than what many ordinary Catholics are accustomed to. Members are expected to engage in daily prayer, spiritual reading, frequent confession, and retreats. They are also encouraged to receive spiritual direction from Opus Dei priests and superiors, ensuring that their lives stay closely aligned with the organization's discipline. One of the most controversial aspects of Opus Dei is the practice of mortification, voluntary physical discomforts undertaken as spiritual exercises. Some celibate members, called numeraries, use a small chain known as a cilice around their thigh for a few hours a day, or practice the discipline, a small whip used during prayer. Supporters describe these as mild and symbolic gestures of sacrifice, rooted in a long Christian tradition of asceticism. Critics, however, portray them as harmful, repressive, and even cult-like, especially when combined with strict spiritual obedience and secrecy. Opus Dei today has around 90,000 members worldwide in more than 90 countries. Unlike religious orders, most members are lay people, not priests. There are different categories of membership, reflecting varying levels of commitment. The majority of members, often married and living ordinary family lives, who follow Opus Dei's spirituality in their homes and workplaces. Celibate members, often living in Opus Dei centers, who dedicate their income and time more fully to the organization. Celibates who live independently but remain closely linked to the prelature. Clergy who belong to Opus Dei, providing spiritual guidance to members. Women make up slightly more than half of the membership, though their roles are often segregated from men's within the structure. For instance, female numeraries sometimes take on domestic tasks within Opus Dei residences, a practice that has sparked criticism as exploitative. The head of Opus Dei is the prelate, elected by members and confirmed by the Pope. The prelature's central offices are in Rome, symbolizing its global authority and close ties to the Vatican. One of the most enduring criticisms of Opus Dei is its aura of secrecy. Historically, members were discouraged, or even forbidden, from openly declaring their affiliation without permission. This discretion was defended as humility and a way of avoiding unnecessary attention. However, critics argue that it enabled the organization to infiltrate spheres of influence quietly, from politics to academia, without public accountability. Former members have described a culture of strict obedience and even surveillance. Letters were sometimes screened, friendships outside the organization were discouraged, and reading materials were censored. Young recruits, especially numeraries, often handed over their salaries to Opus Dei, creating financial dependence and further binding them to the institution. Such practices have fueled accusations that Opus Dei operates more like a closed sect than a transparent Catholic movement. Beyond spirituality, Opus Dei has often been accused of wielding disproportionate influence in politics, finance, and the Vatican. This perception is partly due to the high-profile positions held by some of its members. For instance, in Spain during the Franco dictatorship, several Opus Dei technocrats served as ministers and were credited with modernizing the Spanish economy during the so-called Spanish Miracle. In Latin America, rumors of Opus Dei's ties to authoritarian regimes in Chile and Argentina have persisted, though hard evidence remains contested. In the Vatican itself, Opus Dei is sometimes seen as a conservative counterweight to more liberal currents in Catholic theology, with its members occupying key roles in doctrinal offices and seminaries. Its schools and universities, like the University of Navarra in Spain and IESE Business School in Barcelona, extend its influence into education, economics, and beyond. Critics argue that Opus Dei's combination of discretion, discipline, and elite networking creates an invisible web of influence, amplifying fears of hidden power. Supporters, however, counter that members are simply faithful Catholics who excel in their professions and live their faith sincerely. Throughout its history, Opus Dei has faced waves of controversy. Some of the most common allegations include: former members describe a culture of manipulation, where decisions about education, friendships, and even family ties were heavily controlled by superiors. In Argentina, dozens of women have filed lawsuits claiming that, as teenagers, they were recruited into Opus Dei institutions, forced into unpaid labor, denied education, and subjected to isolation and spiritual abuse. Critics argue that Opus Dei deliberately recruits from wealthy, influential families, creating an inner circle of Catholic elites with disproportionate power. The use of the psilus and self-flagellation has been depicted as extreme, particularly in media portrayals, raising questions about psychological and physical harm. Opus Dei-affiliated organizations often operate through independent charities, making it difficult to trace financial flows or determine the scope of its wealth. Defenders of Opus Dei argue that these allegations are exaggerated or rooted in misunderstanding. They claim that mortification is optional and mild, that work within centers is voluntary, and that members join out of free choice. Nevertheless, the persistence of testimonies from ex-members keeps these debates alive. Perhaps no single event shaped public perception of Opus Dei more than Dan Brown's 2003 novel The Da Vinci Code and its 2006 film adaptation. In the story, a fanatical Opus Dei monk named Silas engages in murder and extreme self-flagellation to protect church secrets. Though fictional, the novel's massive success imprinted an image of Opus Dei as a shadowy, dangerous cult in the global imagination. The organization strongly protested its portrayal, insisting that it was a caricature. Yet paradoxically, the controversy brought Opus Dei unprecedented visibility, prompting both curiosity and suspicion. For many, the mystery only deepened. If Opus Dei was so upset by a fictional depiction, perhaps there was more truth to its shadowy reputation than it admitted. In recent years, Opus Dei has faced growing pressure for transparency and reform. Pope Francis, wary of overly hierarchical or insular structures, introduced changes in 2022 to reduce the autonomy of the prelature. The prelate of Opus Dei can no longer be appointed a bishop, and the organization must now report more regularly to the Vatican's dicastery for the clergy. These changes, while modest, signaled a shift in how the Church views Opus Dei, not as a privileged powerhouse, but as one movement among many, requiring accountability. Meanwhile, lawsuits like those in Argentina continue to tarnish its reputation, raising human rights concerns and prompting investigations into how young women were treated in its institutions. These cases illustrate the broader challenge facing Opus Dei, balancing its identity as a spiritual path with demands for transparency, accountability, and respect for personal freedom in an age less tolerant of secrecy. The legacy of Opus Dei is complex. On one hand, it has inspired thousands of lay Catholics to integrate faith deeply into their professional and family lives. Its educational institutions are respected globally, its members are often admired for integrity and dedication, and its founder, Escriva, was canonized as a saint in 2002. On the other hand, its reputation remains clouded by secrecy, allegations of control, and suspicions of hidden power. For critics, Opus Dei is less a spiritual family and more a disciplined network that blends religion with elitism. For defenders, it is a misunderstood movement unfairly demonized by ex-members and sensational media. The future of Opus Dei may hinge on how it addresses these criticisms. Greater transparency, respect for individual freedom, and careful reform could allow it to flourish as a model of lay holiness in the 21st century. If it clings to secrecy and rigid control, however, it risks being remembered less as a spiritual movement and more as one of Catholicism's most controversial experiments. Opus Dei stands at the crossroads of faith, secrecy, and power. It was born of a noble vision that ordinary life can be holy, and that sanctity is not confined to monasteries or pulpits. But its history has been shadowed by controversy, its practices questioned, and its influence both admired and feared. To some, it represents the disciplined pursuit of God in daily life. To others, it is a reminder of how religion can drift into control and secrecy. The truth, as with many institutions, lies in the tension between ideal and practice, between the sanctity it preaches and the controversies it provokes. Whether Opus Dei emerges in the future as a beacon of modern Catholic spirituality or remains a lightning rod for suspicion will depend on how it reconciles its founding vision with the demands of transparency, accountability, and human dignity in our time.